Adapting visual novels into an anime format has either gone extremely well or extremely poorly. And normally a bulk of the animated visual novel adaptations unfortunately fall into that latter category. However, this is seemingly not the case for the visual novel Gnosia. Gnosia can be best described as a sci-fi social deduction visual novel, similar to other games such as Mafia or Werewolf. In it, the player needs to identify the Gnosia being people who have been infected by this entity called Gno. In the game, the player is stuck in a time loop, and within each loop the number of crew members change, the number of Gnosia change, new roles are introduced, and through this variety, the player can unlock certain situations that advance the overarching narrative. Now, I just want to start off by looking at the foundations of the Gnosia anime adaptation. What's genuinely crazy to me is that Gnosia is getting 21 episodes, each being around 25 minutes long. To put this into perspective, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, with its initial massive popularity and wide-reaching fanbase, gets an average lackluster adaptation of 13 episodes. Like, this is Danganronpa we're talking about here, and it only gets 13 episodes for a game that takes around 30 hours to complete. And what about Love Love Alternative? The visual novel that was one of the major inspirations for Isayama's Attack on Titan manga receives an abysmal 24-episode adaptation split across 2 seasons. The trend goes on and on. Diasire, Persona 5, Umineko, Chaos Head, and the other science adventure visual novels besides Steins Gate all get terrible adaptations that are crippled with the atrocious mismanagement of their episode counts. I'm so pessimistic about visual novel adaptations that I thought Gnosia would only be getting 10 episodes total, but 21? Do Gnosia fans even realize just how well they're eating right now? When I heard that this game was getting an adaptation, my mind was genuinely blown. I assume that news of an anime adaptation came as a shock to most who played and enjoyed the game, as even the developers of the game thought that the offer to turn Gnosia into anime was a scam at first. Like, by most standards, this is a very niche, obscure visual novel that was produced by only 4 people, but it somehow receives a full-on anime adaptation that actually seems to have a solid foundation, unlike other adaptations. The anime is stacked with famous voice actors and actresses, and the series' scriptwriter is the same person who worked on the Steins Gate anime adaptation, specifically picked because of his experience in writing time loop episodes. The opening song is a well-produced collaboration of a plethora of famous pop culture idols, and the series has multiple ending songs, one of them performed by the same band who has worked on other songs for anime such as Psycho-Pass and Tokyo Ghoul. The main composer is the same person who has worked on many of Type Moon's projects, such as the Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works adaptation, as well as the Tsukihime remake and the Witch on the Holy Night visual novels. This is an unprecedented and unusually stacked staff lineup. Now, obviously none of this matters if the narrative and characters are still adapted in a dogshit manner, but the foundation that has been laid, especially for such a series, is extremely impressive, and it honestly reflects a production team that genuinely understands the demands of the source material and desires to treat the adaptation with genuine care. The Gnosia anime essentially got kickstarted by one dude, Yoshitaka Kimura, who fell in love with the game and had an intense desire to turn it into an animated show. He quickly got in touch with the company behind the game, Petit Depoto, I think it's how it's pronounced, and they closely collaborated for 4 years to create the anime. 4 years. To put that into perspective, I believe it took around a year or so to create the Steins Gate anime adaptation. If that's not the case, well, the visual novel came out in 2009, and the anime came out in 2011. In similar terms, the first Danganronpa game came out in 2010 and the anime aired in 2013. So even if we assume that planning for these adaptations began immediately after the respective game releases, this still amounts to less time than what the Gnosia producers devoted to this project. And strongly devoted they were. Petit Depoto specifically chose Aniplex among the offers of a couple of other anime production companies because of the substantial amount of passion that Kimura had for the game. Production of the anime was spearheaded by Kimura and Toru Kawakatsu, the director and producer of Petit Depoto. And I really find it so cool and refreshing that there was such a close level of communication and collaboration between Petit Depoto and Aniplex. The animation staff were given lectures by the game staff at Petit Depoto on Gnosia's setting and worldview, and were also supplied reference materials to ensure consistency with the original material. The game's original character designer was brought in to help develop Yuri's character design, considering that in the game, the main character is essentially a self-insert that represents you, the player. They also brought in like a werewolf supervisor to help teach the staff the logic of werewolf. Obviously, Kawakatsu himself was deeply involved, supervising the scenario and storyboards, determining what content was appropriate for the adaptation. He also committed to attend the recording sessions in person. Speaking of which, The seiyus all agreed that the work environment was filled to the brim with passion and enthusiasm. Like, they were apparently given themed snacks during recording sessions. Kawakatsu would bring rare Gnosia merch at times. Seiyus would also be given scripts for episodes they weren't even involved in order to help them keep up with the story. And when it was all done and over, everyone was gathered together to sit around and watch the trailer. Like, that has to be one of the most wholesome behind-the-scenes production stories I've ever heard of in anime. Kimuro's passion also influenced the band in producing the ending Lu Percent Who Percent, as there was an intimate level of communication in regards to the lyrics and the overall emotional tone that the ending should convey. TK, the band's lead vocalist, literally bought a Nintendo Switch just to play the game. Like, the only game on his Switch is Gnosia. All of this is to say that both the game and anime producers really wanted this anime to succeed and work out and be something special for their fans and any newcomers. So how did they do? I think it's been pretty stellar so far. It's not been perfect, but I never expect any adaptation to be perfect. I don't think the game is perfect anyway. So far it's been quite an amazing adaptation. For the most part, for now. Oh yeah, spoilers for the anime start here until the timestamp on screen. To get the obvious out of the way, the animation is surprisingly beautiful, and the way they were able to adapt a non-linear story in a, so far, cohesive manner is pretty impressive. They really nailed the episodic format in regards to giving us new and interesting events in each video, while also giving us nuggets of information that will become useful later. The direction is also excellent, and I think that while there may be some issues in the overall main story decisions that I will get into later, I actually think many of the small details have been done really well. For instance, Rakio is shown several times eating these tablets, and at first I thought this was an anime original quirk that they added for Rakio, and I was like, that's really cool. But then I realized it actually comes from one singular line that Rakio says in the game, where you essentially make small talk and everyone starts talking about their favorite food, and then in just one line, Rakio defends taking supplements as being sufficient in terms of nutrients. That is amazing because it's such a small, technically meaningless detail to anime, yet it adds a bit of character to Rakio. Personally, I really absolutely adore all of these small details. I love Remnon hugging his legs, huddled underneath the table. I love all of SQ's random movements in the background. I love Yuriko sitting far away from the group, yet still having this menacing, commanding aura to her.
So like, why is she all the way over there?
Talk about aura farming.
I love Shigemichi's voice and demeanor changing around Stella. I love Karushko's hand signals. I love Gina just randomly eating food in the background of this scene. In episode 13, I love how Yuri has anime original dialogue that mentions Chippy gathering fish from the fishing tank and that Xiaoming disapproves, as it is not only consistent with their characters, but adds to them. Chippy wants to take care of his cat, while Xiaoming objects to the exploitation of animals, even synthetic ones, I guess. I love all of these small details because, once again, it just shows the passion of the team behind the anime. They didn't need to do this. None of this really matters to the overall narrative, but just because it's added in, it makes the experience so much more enjoyable. I could go on, and I probably also missed a bunch of details too. Like, I learned recently that since the story has certain transhumanist themes, the opening is sung by a Vocaloid and VTuber, and that was a decision made probably because both figures embody some sort of ambiguity surrounding the human identity. And I'm pointing all this out because even though everyone's going to focus on the plot threads, the pacing, the narrative, the logic, the game, which obviously is all indispensable, it is the particulars and other minor details that, for me, makes the anime ultimately unique and more than a simple adaptation. This passion in adding in these details is what most adaptations are lacking, in my opinion. Most adaptations simply try their best in adapting the story with animation. But do they focus on actually adding to the characters? Do they actually focus on spending time and money to animate these quirks? I don't think so. But anyway, what about the big moments? The actual game, the actual plot, the characterization, etc. Obviously, it is cool to have all these details that elevates the adaptation, but if the pacing is rushed or if the plot is a mess, none of that really matters. To be honest, I was worried at first. The game is mostly non-linear, meaning that everyone's experience is different, and that it's different in each playthrough. For example, I never got the Tears of SQ event, the SQ confession scene, and I never got other scenes such as the ones that are gender locked. Yet I still completed the true ending. Completing the game also takes hundreds of loops to complete, depending on your skill level, with narrative events randomly sprinkled throughout quick, repetitive gameplay. So the anime producers had a really tough job on their hands, and I would argue even having a tougher job than normal linear visual novel adaptations. But they actually nailed it, even doing some events better than the game, such as that peak Kukrushka instant sequence, actual absolute cinema with the blood, the terror of the Gnosia Gina, the glitched fake-out ED, and the rendition of the game song Aster. Actual peak cinema. Most of the characters are also characterized very well, some even better than the game, in my opinion. It's such a colorful cast with their own unique personalities and mannerisms, and an anime managed to adapt them all, adding to the characters in many cases. Also, props to the animation team for taking the time to animate Comet's slime and Chippy's jacket patterns. I cannot even imagine how much of a headache that must have been. Anyways, Yuri is an absolutely amazing anime original character. As I mentioned before, in the game, the main character is a complete self-insert. You can choose their name, gender, skills, and their personality through various choices. So I was worried about how the main character would function in the anime, but the producers actually cooked so hard. Yuri has a distinct, likable personality with their own quirks, such as fumbling their bangs when they're in deep thought and being a masterful drawer. They even have some snide and competitive spirit to them as well. Their character design is also just chef's kiss, absolutely brilliant. Watching them progress, improve, and learn throughout the show is so rewarding, and only this specific production team could have pulled this off. Okay, but I've been glazing the show for too long. There is one fault in the adaptation that I want to talk about. Now, I originally had an entire page dedicated to all of the inconsistencies and logical errors that Levi poses. How is it that an engineer can confirm who a Gnosia is, but Levi can't? How does the Guardian Angel role even work? How do the Gnosia actually take control over the ship in the end? Do they hack Levi? If so, why couldn't they do it on day one? When the Gnosia win, how does Levi not realize this and self-destruct? For world lines where there is only one Gnosia, why can't we just start cycling people in and out of cold sleep and test them for an infection? Between meetings, why can't we bring out confirmed humans from cold sleep, especially if we've seen this happen successfully? How does Levi not realize who the true engineer is when the engineers have to engage with the ship's systems in order to effectively operate? Is Levi actively listening in on all of the conversations that are happening around the ship, or is she similar to an Alexa, where she has to be prompted first? Okay, so essentially the criticisms boil down to the fact that Levi is a super advanced AI, yet unable to help in any fashion to determine who the Gnosia are, much less stop the Gnosia from taking over. Now you might not like what I'm about to say, but this is just a fact that the audience will have to accept. However, I honestly don't think that it will lower the enjoyment from watching the show at all. When you play the game, none of these questions or inconsistencies affect experience since, well, it's a game. But obviously when the game is translated into an anime format, people now expect concrete answers to issues such as Levi's competency or lack thereof. Just remember that Gnosia is based off of games like the Werewolf or Mafia, which don't have any explanations to how the game mechanics work. When you're playing these games, you're not thinking about why can the werewolves only kill one person per night? Why can't two werewolves kill two people? How do the roles like the seer or the detective or turncoat do what they do? These questions don't matter in the grand scheme of playing Werewolf or Mafia, and their unanswerability doesn't affect the experience at all. But okay, I do understand this criticism regarding Gnosia. From a game perspective, Levi's mechanics and restrictions as well as the specifics regarding the functionality of the roles don't matter. But from a story perspective, these are actually logical problems that we are expecting answers to. And for a show, it is hard to ignore those issues. I will just say that the game does have bare bones explanations for Levi's mechanics and for questions like why are we even warping in the first place. For example, the game explains the Guardian Angel is able to protect someone because they supposedly delayed a time of warp, or whatever that means. There's no explanation for why they can't protect themselves or anything like that. But genuinely though, does knowing that information matter to you or your enjoyment? If so, then genuinely try and find a way to alter it then. It's just that if you try and alter the game to have explanations for everything, it will not be a werewolf style game anymore. So I would just say to accept the loopholes for what they are, which is simply just game mechanics, or simply have your own headcanon because it really is important and it really is not going to be an impediment to your enjoyment of the show. And no, this isn't me telling you to shut off your brain and ignore these problems. Yes, these problems exist and are unanswered, and honestly, it will probably stay that way. But will receiving explanations for these issues really affect your experience? Like if I gave you a complete logical answer to how the Guardian Angel role protects other crew members, or how the engineer role utilizes the ship's systems and beep boops some buttons to detect anomalies or whatever, will you really feel satisfied, or will you just simply try and find another issue to complain about? Anyways, now I'm going to complain about some issues. For me personally, there are several areas in which the adaptation might be considered a downgrade from the game. I think the audience's connection with Setsu is definitely diminished compared to the game, considering that there is a genuine sense of camaraderie and cooperation between Setsu and the player. In the game, Setsu is a lot more friendly and honestly a lot more helpful, and there really is an authentic sense that, yeah, we're going through this together, we're in this together, let's collaborate and help each other in terms of information. The anime does show that Setsu and Yuri have a special relationship, but for some reason Setsu is a lot more closed off and paranoid, which I guess makes some sort of sense, but I found the resistance to exchanging information about the loops as a whole somewhat strange. In episode 10, I think that switching Yuri's gender was a bit unnecessary and maybe even slightly jarring, as in the game, you can obtain all of Xiaoming's relevant information without being a woman. But I suppose it's not logically inconsistent with the abilities of the Silver Key, so I won't say that it makes no sense. I personally just thought that it was pretty obvious that the only reason why they switched Yuri's gender was because they wanted to adapt Xiaoming's, essentially a confession scene, in the anime. So Yuri's gender bender experience was forced just because the plot demanded it. But I mean, I do appreciate them trying to give Xiaoming more character since he was quite a nothing burger in the game. I found episode 10 as a whole to be a pretty weak episode. The pacing definitely felt rushed, like the Karushka doll reveal was spliced awkwardly within the Citizen Slime event. And I think as a whole, they made Comet out to be extremely stupid, like egregiously idiotic. Look, I understand that Comet is not the most logical person. I get that she doesn't understand technology or logically how deduction works, so I'm not complaining about how she is illogical. I'm just saying that we do not see any redemption. In the game, Comet is such a huge help as a crew member. She's able to detect lies so effortlessly, and since she's terrible at lying, you're able to pick up on her lies easily. So it's easy to confirm early on whether or not she is a crew member, and once you know that she's safe, then finding the Gnosia would be way less difficult, especially when you can pull out the Say You're Human card. This makes Comet to be such an interesting player, since she is able to detect lies but is unable to convince the group logically why they should vote for the target. And we just do not see this nuance in the anime. Comet is almost always a Gnosia and gets immediately voted off. And in the few instances that she's a crew member, she does absolutely nothing except ask stupid clarification questions. What makes this worse is that in episode 10, they changed the event, where in the game, Comet is sent to cold sleep because we voted her off, and then Jonas, because he's insane, for some reason takes her out of the chamber, immediately releasing the slime. But in the anime, Comet just stumbles in and freezes herself accidentally, which prompts Jonas to try and save her, which then unleashes the slime. This is such a different situation because it's basically Comet's own bumbling ass that is at fault for killing everyone. She was just so stupid that she somehow froze herself, and then Jonas, the apparent good guy in this scenario, tries to save her. That's not how it was in the game. And I just want to point out that intuition doesn't just mean being able to detect lies easier. It means that you have an unexplainable gut feeling, usually about something dangerous or wrong. So how would Comet stumble into the cold sleep chamber and freeze herself? Doesn't her intuition tell her that, hey, this machine is weird, maybe you should step back or something? Justice for Comet, man. Like, I would actually argue that she was done the most dirty in this show so far, despite her screen time and having an entire episode dedicated to her. Maybe Stella would be a close second contender. But yeah, I definitely don't think that it's a character assassination or anything extreme like that, but I just wish they showed off more nuance in regard to Comet's character. But anyway, besides these honestly minor critiques about the show, I genuinely think that it's amazing so far. And I think that studios and production companies should look to the Gnosia production as an example of how to actually create a well thought out, strong, and effective adaptation. I definitely would recommend this show to anyone who would enjoy a chill social deduction story, and I really hope they cook with the ending. To be honest, I'm actually extremely apprehensive and skeptical on how they will be able to do so. Like, I'm genuinely afraid and terrified on how they will be able to adapt the game's ending. But I have faith. I have faith in the passion, in the understanding, and experience of the producers, and I trust that they will have something in mind that will hit home.